Welcome to my session, Putting SD into SDI. That is, putting self-determination into specially designed instruction. I'm Amy Pleet-Odle. I have combined my 50 years of experience as an English teacher, special educator, transition coordinator, State Department specialist, college professor, and parent into my consulting company, Inclusion Focused Coaching. I don't think I've missed a CEC convention since 1995, and I always learn something that I can pass on to others. Isn't that why you're watching this? So you can learn something for yourself and hopefully find a golden nugget that you can use? Maybe something really sparkly that you can pass on to others. Throughout this workshop, I will give you opportunities to process my key points and post your thoughts in the chat. It's totally optional, of course, but we all know that learning doesn't occur from passive listening. Virtual conference presentations that are pre-recorded run the risk of audience glaze over. So I'll give you a chance to participate. Besides, I expect I'll learn something from your posts. I will try to monitor and respond throughout the conference, but I'll definitely be live during the time this session is aired, and I look forward to interacting with you. This is a grand experiment with making virtual presentations, both synchronous and asynchronous, interactive. Each time, right after I post a question, I'll play a little music to give you time to process and respond. And we know that music re-engages brain cells. I think that will also give me time when it's played live to interact with you. So here goes the first question. Use the Twitter chat format. You simply write Q1 and then your answer. Why are you watching this workshop? So here's your first music. I've packed a lot into this presentation, so if you watched the whole thing and you didn't find what you came for, or you can't find anything that you can use, please contact me. I'll give you my contact information at the end. As you watch this presentation, I hope you'll continuously write comments and questions in the chat, and I will try to respond to them throughout the conference. At the end, I'll tell you how to access the handout. Intended outcomes for this session. First, we're going to review the frameworks for specially designed instruction and self-determination. We will identify the implications of the Andrew F. Supreme Court decision on self-determination training, and we'll consider how high-leverage evidence-based practices in SDI can promote SD. At the end, you'll have an opportunity to brainstorm how to embed youth self-efficacy and metacognition and self-determination into SDI using a real-life scenario. First, let's look at the context that underscores this discussion. What do we mean by self-determination? And why is self-determination important? Let me see what you think. Please respond in the chat. Again, use the Twitter chat format of Q2, so I'll know what question you're answering, and then answer, why is self-determination important? Here's your thinking music. While you're finishing your thoughts, I'll give you a few facts. The latest published special ed data is for the 2018-19 school year. 7.1 million students across the country receive special ed services. They made up 14% of public school students. That's a steady increase of 1 percentage point per year, with a third of them being students with specific learning disability. 95% of them were enrolled in regular schools. 64% of them spent 80% or more of their day in regular classes. Of the students that exited that year, 73% graduated with a high school diploma and 10% received an alternate certificate, and 16% dropped out. I can't wait to read what you wrote about why you think self-determination is important. If we were synchronous, I'd read your thoughts out loud, but these statistics have to inform our thinking. Let me tell you about a common experience when I was a transition coordinator. One part of my job description was to support students with IEPs in the process of gaining work experience. I loved celebrating with students when they were hired, but that generally didn't happen right away. You see, I would get to know the student, his interests, his experiences, his quirks, and of course his disability. I would make appointments with employers. I would prep the student for the interview, and then the student would say something in the interview that broke my heart. I would hear things like, "I'm pretty slow with learning things," or "No, I don't have a disability, I'm just lazy," or "What problems might I have on this job? Well, I hate it when people boss me around." If you're a transition coordinator, I'm sure you've heard some of the same things and plenty of others. Now, you recall the purpose of our special education law is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. Please note the part I've circled. Once a transition coordinator, always a transition coordinator, I think we should be preparing students for successful post-secondary outcomes from kindergarten. That's why self-determination is half of this presentation. If the purpose of special ed is to prepare our students for employment, further education, and independent living, how are we doing? Let's look at the latest statistics released from the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics in February 2020. The 2021 stats weren't published yet when I made this presentation. Here's question 3. Please write it in the chat. What's your guess about the missing number? Use Q3 and then the number. Sorry, no music for this one since you're just writing a number. These are data for adults over 16 across the United States who are living in the community and available to work. You'll see that for those who identified as non-disabled, the employment rate in 2009 was about 65%. 10 years later, it was 63%. We know employment fluctuates with the economy, but it's held in that 60-70% range. Of course, I'm sure the COVID pandemic has had a major impact. Now, let's look at the bottom row. Adults over 16 who identified as having a disability in 2009. Incidentally, that's the first year they collected disability employment data. That year, it was 19%. Now, in the past 10 years, we've had research-informed improvements in special education services and transition services. So, what do you think the employment rate was in 2019? Can't wait to read your responses. Well, here it is. Think about it. If this rate holds, 1 in 5 of the students you serve now with IEPs will be employed. Incidentally, that includes all disability categories. It includes those in full-time positions as well as part-time. It includes those who aren't making a living wage. We have to do something about this. To get the full impact of this problem, take a look at this graph. The blue line is adults without disabilities. As I said, it hovers in the 60-70% range. But the employment of adults with disabilities has flatlined ever since we've been tracking it. This is unacceptable. I believe that self-determination is a major factor in this problem. So, let's look at what we mean by self-determination. There's a rich body of literature on the skills of self-determination. Depending on who you read, you will find some or all of these topics addressed. Think about where you could foster student self-determination now within your daily interactions and learning opportunities. How about teaching students to know themselves, to have awareness of their disability and how it impacts them, to develop learner autonomy, to know what type of learning strategies work for them, self-regulation, making choices, goal setting, learning from mistakes, and requesting support as needed. The point of all self-determination is to empower students to become causal agents in their life. I love that phrase. Do they see themselves as a helpless victim dependent on others and waiting for their universe to make things right for them? Or are they the authors of their own life story? Do they see themselves behind the wheel, driving themselves on the road to their future? They may not be able to manage everything independently. Well, none of us can, right? But most of them could do a lot more than they're doing right now. This is not an overnight magical transformation. They won't instantly become self-determined on a certain birthday. I believe that self-determination should begin in early childhood. What can they take ownership for now? How can they assume responsibility for themselves now? What choices can we give them so they learn to make decisions, learn from mistakes, and develop persistence? I want to suggest two other related fields of research that you can use to expand your conception of self-determination. The first body of related research is on mindset. I'm sure you're familiar with Carol Dweck's work on mindset. Her research revealed that we have basically two mindsets depending on the life domain you're thinking of. You can probably think of some areas of your life that you regard with a fixed mindset. For me, it's accounting. I don't think I can pay close enough attention to numbers for long spans of time. I'm just not good at it, and I don't think I could ever be. Lucky for me, I can hire somebody who loves it. Also, lucky for me, my success with tracking numbers and spreadsheets will not determine my success in life. Now, could I get better at it? Maybe if I had a growth mindset about it, but frankly, I'd rather put my energy somewhere else. On the other hand, I have a growth mindset regarding educational innovation and experimentation. I know there's so many areas I still have to learn. I also know that I can learn by reading, by attending every webinar and workshop I can fit into my schedule, and by creating tools and materials that teachers can use. I'm not worried about getting it exactly right, and I love partnering with educators and education leaders who thrive by taking educational risks. We won't know what will work until we try it, and we'll learn something from every effort, like I'm experimenting with the interactive part of this workshop. Now, why do I bring it up here? Well, when we're talking about a student's self-determination, what mindset does that student hold about himself and about his possibilities? What does he say to himself when things don't turn out? When he gets a poor grade or he hasn't mastered a skill? Does he say, I haven't learned it yet? Does he embrace those valuable failure moments as an opportunity to learn and expand his capabilities? Or does he see those moments as proof that he is disabled, that he's incapable, that he's less than others? A student's growth mindset is critical to learn to self-advocate and to become a causal agent in his life. Now, a closely related question looks at the mindset of those influential adults around him. Do they have a growth mindset about his capability and his future? Do they see an IQ score and lower their expectations? Do they see a student who struggles with peer interactions and see possibilities? Now, when I say influential adults, you know who I mean. Teachers, school leaders, transition coordinators, family, employers, neighbors, community resource personnel, well, everybody. The second body of research is executive skills. Peg Dawson proposes there are 11 executive skills. Other experts claim a different number. As we think about self-determination, we have to consider executive skills. These are essential life skills. Our students need to manage themselves in each one of these skills, whether they can do it independently or with scaffolding. There's no shame these days in using supports for these. For example, I don't keep my calendar in my head. I'm grateful for my Google Calendar and reminder alarms that I can set for myself. Look at some of these other executive skills. Flexibility to deal with changes like a global pandemic. Planning and prioritizing tasks that they need to manage at home and for school. Time management goes without saying. Goal-directed persistence. Can they keep going when life throws them challenges? And metacognition. Do they understand how their thinking works? Are they aware of their own triggers? Can they talk themselves out of an emotional outburst? These are all skills that will be needed in the workplace and in adult life, but we need to start early. They might be included on a student's individualized learning plan, or they might be part of the curriculum for a whole class. Don't all third graders need to work on flexibility? Don't all seventh graders need to work on task initiation? Great. The more we normalize these conversations, the less stigmatizing they are. So, hopefully you're on board with teaching self-determination. Thinking about all these components and considering how we could promote growth mindset and executive skills. That's a tall order, isn't it? But it's important. In fact, it might be more critical to the student's future success than learning academic skills. But that's just my opinion. So what's stopping us? Write in the chat Q4 and your biggest challenge to teaching self-determination to your students, and I will respond to your posts. If you're watching on your own time, I'll respond soon. Here's your thinking music. While you're posting, we'll leave self-determination for a bit and focus on the other half of this presentation. This session is called Putting SD into SDI, so let's explore some possibilities. Of course, you know that IDEA requires measurable annual goals, right? To enable the child to be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum. IDEA specifically designs specially designed instruction as adapting as appropriate to the needs of the eligible child, the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the unique needs of the child, the result for the child's disability, and ensure access of the child to the general curriculum. So whether instruction is in person, remote, or hybrid, we must adapt instruction for that individual child, the content, the methodology, and the delivery. Let's step back and look at the big picture of special education law. First, we know that there are IDEA requirements related to creating an individualized education program with all the components on that left box. I don't need to tell you that this encompasses writing the IEP and implementing it with integrity. You know it includes progress monitoring, and the whole process is an ongoing team procedure, including the families and the student if he's at transition age or earlier. Now, at the same time, we have the box on the right, which lists transition best practices. As I said, I was a transition coordinator for 12 years at the local district level and then at the state level. I've seen schools struggling with the logistics of how to conduct these transition components as separate activities outside of academic learning time, especially student development. But when we drop down to the bottom of this graphic, we have to confront our results, improved post-secondary outcomes. We looked at the employment rates earlier. We have to face it. There is something missing. With a few exceptions, in a few locations, most students are not achieving satisfying post-secondary outcomes. We have to ask, what's missing? What would it take to go from the boxes at the top to improved outcomes? Well, I think the Andrew F. Supreme Court decision has given us a big nudge to address that what's missing box. By now, I'm sure you're aware of the Andrew F. versus Douglas County Supreme Court decision on March 22, 2017. The court rejected de minimis standard. The ruling said it's insufficient for the student to receive just minimal benefit from the services in their IEP. Instead, the ruling says the goals and services written to the IEP must be reasonably calculated to enable the child to make measurable progress. And they said the appropriate progress will be individually determined for each student. And the ruling stated that families must be involved in meaningful ways in IEP development and progress. So let's think about it. If the IEP must be reasonably calculated to enable the child to make appropriate progress, we have to weave all of this together. Academic, transition, self-determination. Isn't it really all one unified commitment to prepare students for post-secondary outcomes? I think we can do it within the SDI process. I was fortunate to hear Mary Brownell introduce a functional definition of SDI at a CEC convention. She made a clear distinction between specially designed instruction and providing accommodations. Extended time, alternate formats, copy of the notes, they provide access, but they are not specially designed instruction. Also, modifications like altering the rigorous expectations, they're not specially designed instruction either. Instead, if it's specially designed instruction, if it is designed to teach students a strategy to be a causal agent in their life, we will follow these 6 steps. Unlike accommodations or modifications, specially designed instruction is actually instruction. It is teaching a skill or a strategy that is individually chosen for a student to enable him to make measurable progress. Yes, you're going to have this slide, well, all of them in my hand up, but better yet, get this book. Let's think through these 6 steps with a case study example. First, I want to introduce you to some characters who come alive in my specially designed instruction PD package. Callie and Mr. Hanhart, her stepfather. She has an IEP. I'll give you a few details about Callie here so you can see how this will play out. She has significant ADHD that interferes with her focus. While her decoding skills are on grade level, she struggles with comprehension and fluency because of her distractibility. She misses a lot of instruction in class too, both in person and online, because she just doesn't focus. When school was in session, Callie's teacher supported her with a seat away from distractions, and then they used proximity and gestures to redirect her. None of that seems possible with remote learning, right? I could give you more details, but they're not important for our quick explanation today. We're exploring the thinking process behind self-determination and specially designed instruction as one process. So maybe you have a Callie, or maybe you want to apply our process to another student that you'd like to serve more effectively. So I'll share about Callie's case. I'll trust you to fill in individual details and think through how this would work for your student. Miss Bates is the math teacher, but she could be any professional on the IEP team. She could be Callie's general or special educator, a speech therapist, a behavior interventionist, or a transition coordinator. Again, translate whatever I'm saying to fit positions in your school or district. Miss Bates is responsible for providing Callie with specially designed instruction, and she wants to include self-determination at the same time. This is the interactive part. As we go through the steps of the SDI process, I'm going to invite you to brainstorm with me. Let's see how this is going to work, but we won't know if we don't try, right? We know that special educators, therapists, specialists will select appropriate strategies based on the student current level. So we'd have an IEP goal, and then they select a strategy. So this IEP team reviewed assessments to determine Callie's current skill levels in any domain affected by her disability: reading, math, executive skills, speech, behavior. And then they considered high leverage and evidence-based practices that are reasonably calculated to provide just the right intervention and support so that Callie will make measurable progress in that domain. Miss Bates recognized that Callie would be significantly more distractible at home during virtual and hybrid learning. She spoke with Mr. Hanhart, and they agreed that Callie's driving need right now is her distractibility. Miss Bates selected an evidence-based metacognitive strategy called SOS, which teaches students to self-monitor their self-talk and substitute for more helpful thinking patterns. So let's see if you're with me. Write Q5 in the chat, and then one strategy or intervention you might select for your student to address an IEP goal. Teachers in my package learn to navigate the websites for high leverage and evidence-based practices to select powerful, proven strategies. But for today's discussion, just list one strategy that you will use for your learning here, or maybe following with me on Callie's metacognitive strategy is exactly what you need. This list of considerations will be part of your thinking as you take step 1. Okay, let's have some music to go along with your thinking. Now, step 2, provide rationale. So, Miss Bates is going to provide a rationale. Here's question 6. Who is she providing the rationale to? Who would you provide rationale to? I'm going to give you a shorter piece of music while you think about that. Now let's think about the considerations for this stage. Yes, we want to provide rationale to other professionals, co-teachers, paraprofessionals, therapists, and family. I hope at least some of you thought of the student. How else are we going to secure student buy-in? Have you ever tried to support a student, especially a teenager, to make changes without their buy-in? It's not pretty. This is where the SD comes in. For all of us, we're more likely to make changes and improve ourselves when we have a long-term commitment. So how can we secure student buy-in? Maybe linked to their post-secondary dreams? What if we share the current level performance as a baseline and invite the student and the parents to help us set the target level of performance? In Callie's case, Ms. Bates asked her what she's interested in, and Callie said, "I've always wanted to be a nurse, but I'm not getting very good grades." So Ms. Bates said, what if we could come up with a strategy that could help you focus more so your grades would improve? Would you be interested? Well, she had the buy-in of Callie because it's tied to her future goals. Step 3 just sounds like good teaching. Ms. Bates will model the new strategy using a think aloud so that Callie will have a sense of the underlying thinking that it's used for that strategy. If Callie is learning from home, who else needs to know that think aloud? And what other teachers need to know this strategy so they can reinforce it when Callie is in their class? If Miss Bates were sitting right next to Callie modeling the strategy, she would know whether Callie was with her. She could watch body language and facial expression. She could tell if she needed to slow down and break the process into smaller chunks. She could also gauge her level of commitment to learn the skill or change her behavior. How would all that change during telepractice? Think about the advice you might give Miss Bates for teaching a strategy in a virtual environment, or speculate about how you would need to adjust the strategy for your student in a virtual environment. And let's move on to step 4. Callie will be given opportunities to practice with feedback from Ms. Bates. So Callie's practicing her SOS metacognitive strategy. She's going to pay attention to her self-talk, reassure herself, and then redirect herself back to the task at hand. It's a 3-step process. Ms. Bates may have to use some different approaches to accomplish guided practice, right? How will she know whether Callie is actually using the SOS strategy? She certainly can't look inside her head. We know that we humans are resistant to any new habit, right? How is she going to be able to monitor Callie's practice and provide encouraging feedback? It's hard enough in a brick and mortar school. How can Miss Bates support Callie when school is remote or in hybrid? Of course, if Mr. Hanhart is willing and able, he may provide feedback. Step 5 is where the student practices independently. If we are in remote or hybrid learning, most independent practice is asynchronous, isn't it? They say practice makes perfect, right? Well, not if Callie is practicing something incorrectly. And does Callie have the self-regulation to keep practicing if nobody has structured the learning environment? So we're back to talking about self-determination, aren't we? Think about the executive skills that I shared earlier. If Callie isn't the causal agent in her life, what do we need to do? What do we need to build in to support her? What structures have to be in place to support Callie's persistence? How can Miss Bates help her sustain her buy-in? Who does Callie have in her support network? And what does progress monitoring look like? I'm going to pause for a moment so you can digest these last 3 steps: modeling, guided practice, and independent practice. For Q7, what advice or questions would you give Miss Bates for those 3 steps? Or what advice or questions would you be telling yourself? Here's some thinking music. Now, this final step is where Callie takes what she has learned and generalizes it to other settings and other situations. Whether she's been working on a goal for reading comprehension, speech, behavior, dexterity, or time management, up until now she's been learning and practicing it to become proficient with Miss Bates. We have to assume that this skill was selected in the first place because it's a skill that will help her across environments and situations. What does Miss Bates have to consider, and who does she need to collaborate with to support Callie to generalize that same skill in her other academic classes, in social interactions, and across her life? Suppose it was a speech articulation skill. Could she use it in her social studies Zoom class? Or a reading comprehension skill to manage text complexity? Could she practice that in science? Or a behavior skill like managing her anxiety? Could she practice it during a breakout room collaborative peer discussion in ELA? In each case, Ms. Bates needs a system for collaborating with other team members, including Mr. Hanhart, and a system for progress monitoring. This is much more complicated when everyone is practicing remotely, right? You can't just walk down the hall and pop in on your colleagues. So thank you for your contributions to our brainstorming session. I can't wait to read all of your posts. I will also try to capture the chat when the conference has ended and make it available to you with my handout. Now, I'd like to invite you to pause for a moment to think about this sequence of SDI and consider our conversation. And I want to ask you the final question, Q8. How does self-determination belong in specially designed instruction? What new insights do you have? Please post them in the chat, and I'll give you our last music interlude. During the airing of my presentation, I'll invite you to post any additional questions and comments now. I'll go ahead and wrap up this presentation for the recording, but I'll respond to your questions online the best I can. The handout includes these references if you want to explore deeper on your own. And here is my contact information. If you want to get in touch with me, my website has more information about my services and packages. I do respond to email. Let me know your thoughts about today's workshop. Contact me if you want to brainstorm and go deeper into anything we've talked about today. At the bottom, there's a link where you can go to access the handouts from both of my sessions. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much.